we could have said, look, this is what has happened when we got involved to fight terror in Iraq or Afghanistan. We should have learned lessons from Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and see that if you treat whole population in a particular way, you are really sowing the seeds for future headaches and future challenges and future problems, security problems to yourselves. And we should have learned, and we should have applied those lessons. And I don't think that we have. Neither has the government, nor has the opposition.
Well, let's turn now to Arminka Helic, Conservative peer and foreign policy expert. Good afternoon, Arminka.
Good afternoon.
You heard those very emotional speeches at the UN in New York, the Secretary General talking about people being moved around like human pinballs. What do you make of what you've heard this afternoon from New York and what we've seen unfolding in Gaza?
Well, they are emotional speeches, and if I would just like to start by starting with a basic sort of fact. And basic fact is that what happened on the 7th of October was a terrorist attack. People were killed. Women were allegedly raped, and there are some strong reports pointing to that. And people were taken hostages, including children. That is something that we have to bear in mind. At the same time, we have to bear in mind that Israel is a democracy, is a fellow democracy, it's an ally, and there is a huge distinction between a terrorist organization that is Hamas and a country like Israel that is a democracy. And we would expect that Israel would behave in a different way. And that is a problem that we have seen unfold over the last 2 months. And the speech by the UN Secretary General was not only very strong and emotional, but it really calls on each one of us to stop and think as to what is happening and how best this can be stopped and resolved.
Well, I'll come back to the how in a minute, but when you talked about, holding Israel to a higher standard effectively, because, they're a democracy, they're an ally. So in terms of what you've seen in Gaza, what's being perpetrated by the Israelis, how does that match with that standard?
It doesn't. And it doesn't. Our own support for Israel doesn't match to the standards that I would expect from a fellow democracy and a country that is capable of responding in a different manner. This was a terrorist attack. It demanded a counter-terrorist response. I don't want to judge from afar as to whether it is a collective punishment or not, but this is what the UN Secretary General has said, and his information, I would expect, is based on the very good information from Gaza, from UN agencies, and response that we have seen so far, where you have 70% of those who are killed, women and children, when you have 1.9 million people made refugees, where you have them being moved from A to B to C and back, and nowhere being safe, where they're being humiliated and dehumanized to the point where there is no food, where there is no access to basic sanitary needs that people have, where there is no electricity, where they are being treated in a way that we would not want to see anyone treated, is something where I would say that Israel has fallen short of the ideals that we would expect from a fellow democracy.
And do you want the UK government to start calling that out more aggressively? Do you think you haven't heard enough condemnation from the UK?
I would have hoped so, that both UK government and the opposition would have before we gave a green card and a blank check to Israel at the very beginning. And I do completely understand that there was a moment where there was such a shock and such an outrage in Israel, and I do not for a second doubt that it was very deeply felt. However, it would have not been felt as deeply in the United States or United Kingdom or the EU. So we should have had more, as a friend, more to say, and in a way to be that critical friend, because we could have said, look, this is what has happened when we got involved to fight terror in Iraq or Afghanistan. We should have learned lessons from Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and see that if you treat whole population in a particular way, you are really sowing the seeds for future headaches and future challenges and future problems, security problems to yourselves. And we should have learned, and we should have applied those lessons. And I don't think that we have. Neither has the government, nor has the opposition. There are calls now, and I hope those calls are going to be stronger and louder, but we should have done it at the very beginning.
So as well as condemnation, do you want an immediate ceasefire, as the UN Secretary General is calling for?
I mean, it's not, ceasefire is not even something for discussion. If you have people dying in the numbers, and if you have the people being wounded and in the numbers that there are, if you have a catastrophe that is unfolding in front of our own eyes, not to have ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, is almost irresponsible.
Irresponsible sounds, to put it mildly.
Well, irresponsible, yes, it's scandalous, but it's irresponsible. We ought to be able to speak to our allies, and we cannot continue supporting this kind of operation. I fully understand and fully respect the need for Israel to feel safe, like every other country in the world, but there are ways in which that security and safety can be secured. I do not believe that you can have that security and safety if you are going to collectively punish 2 million people.
Well, you talked earlier about the allegations of rape on the 7th of October. You, of course, were a key part of the sexual violence initiative that William Hague, as Foreign Secretary, undertook with the support of Angelina Jolie. And I remember travelling with you to the Congo to see what was being done there, to gather evidence, because that's part of the problem here, isn't there? That, there were bodies burned. There are traumatized survivors who, perhaps are not in a position to give evidence. So how do we now go about gathering evidence and securing justice? Is that a fanciful idea, justice?
That is not a fanciful idea. That is absolutely necessary. First, I want to say that I have raised this with my own government at the very beginning of what happened. I have spoken about it. I have raised this issue. I think it is essential that Israeli authorities are given all the support and all the necessary expertise that we can share as a lead country that deals with sexual violence in conflict, so that the evidence can be collected in such a way that is admissible in court, and those who have committed those crimes can be held accountable. And even if they were never caught, you do want to have evidence so that, if I may say so, lessons can be learned from this. And, this is not only in Israel, across the world, when you have conflict, women and children and men become targets of this despicable crime.
Arminka Helic, Baroness Helic, thank you very much for joining us.